Hello, hello, and happy Monday, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Convo. So, The Convo is a series put on by Leadership Indianapolis that provides opportunities to learn about community leaders, organizations, issues, and opportunities in our city. I am Ebony Chappelle, and I'm so honored to serve as Director of Programs and Communication for Leadership Indianapolis and serve as the host for this great series where we talk with local leaders. So today I am going to be talking with Brian Shutt, who is an entrepreneur and co founder of Refinery 46. Refinery 46 is a co working space that grew out of a desire to create a culture of motivated, locally owned companies, confident to invest in their own growth and humble to learn from others. So I'm really, really excited to be talking with Brian, and I'll go ahead and bring him on screen. If you have any questions or comments during our conversation, be sure to share them. But hi, Brian. How are you doing
Hi.
today?
Wonderful. How are you?
I am doing great, enjoying this Monday. It's a little gloomy and rainy outside, but it's a great Monday nonetheless. How about you?
Yeah, same. Great attitude there. We have to have that in the Midwest. We have to. I mean, it's sort of cliche to talk about, but I think our weather patterns breed a more sort of resilient type of person. So we have to put up
Hmm.
with these type of rainy, cold days, but having a great
Absolutely.
day.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I know that sort of resilient attitude is probably par for the course for someone like yourself, being an entrepreneur, working in these spaces because you just kind of have to go with the flow a lot of times.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is no day that's the same. But yeah, entrepreneurship sort of definitely teaches you to have to push through um, new challenges every day. So yeah, there's definitely sort of a muscle memory there. Waking up, not knowing what to expect, and just having to deal with it. So absolutely,
Yeah. So let's walk it back a little bit.
yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about your background and how you came to the place where we see you today.
yeah. So I grew up in Indy. As I was just mentioning, was born on the Northeast side. Had a really sort of interesting educational background. So I got a contrast of experiences. Went to Orchard School through eighth grade, and then went to Lawrence Central High School. So had a pretty diverse educational experience. My dad was a pastor, and my mom was a nurse, and so I didn't have sort of a great degree of business exposure when I was a kid, but I
Mm.
was definitely encouraged to be creative, and I that's sort of
And I'm
um,
sure compassionate as well.
absolutely, yeah, definitely got that from my mom. She was a nurse for a lot of years, especially serving in the mental health community. And yeah, just being exposed to and sort of growing up around all sorts of folks has definitely been embedded in the approach that I take to business now. But yeah, so I just didn't have a business background. And so um, after LC went to Purdue and was in the business school there, and Purdue. I had an awesome experience. I probably learned more applicable sort of education from my experience and involvement in fraternity. Um,
Mm.
Basically, running a small business with a bunch of guys that definitely diverse in opinion, and I would say it was like running a business, but you couldn't fire people. So
Mm.
talk about building resilience.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
because you're stuck with them at that point.
yeah, and it's not exactly the same as a business at 3 a.m. on a Thursday when you have to wake up for a test the next day, and the whole
Mhm.
second floor of your fraternity house has decided it's a good time to invite the whole campus over. So different experience in some ways, but as a leader in the fraternity house, I definitely pulled out a lot of practical, sort of useful knowledge that's been applicable to running some small businesses. But Purdue was a great experience, and as I was sharing, it just I got out at a great time, early 2000s, and was learning a lot in the marketing and communications world. And then the economy tanking in 2008, 2009.
Mhm.
provided me with a beneficial opportunity. That's my positive spin. Uh, that's my way of saying I didn't have a job, and so I had to do something. And so a good friend and I created a heating and cooling business in 2009. So that was the first business that I started without any background in heating and cooling. And so,
So what made, I want to just stop there. So you had no
yeah.
experience, one, just in business, except for what you had learned
Mhm.
running the fraternity when you were in school, and of course, what you picked up in coursework. Um, so that coupled with no experience in HVAC, but you decided, I'm going to start an HVAC business. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So local, local business, scalable. I felt like my marketing background and my business partner's finance background gave us some degree of competitive advantage over some of our peers in the industry. But I mean, not to just be humble, but I mean, we didn't know a whole lot, and that's why I always say I wouldn't advise it to anybody else in that specific way. It's definitely a technical trade that our learning curve was steep, but gratefully we were able to bring in a great team of people on the technical side that sort of married well with our business background. But kind of connecting dots to sort of my tongue-in-cheek comment early on, it's like there were 2 or 3 years of like just learning, sort of battling through like a new wall that was created each day. And so that sort of capacity to have resilience, it was sort of bred by the necessity of nobody was hiring a sort of early career marketing generalist in 2010. So
Yeah.
there's this sort of cliched phrase in entrepreneur spaces that you kind of burning the ships, that sort of mentality of like if you take away sort of options, that's the way you're going to have some degree of success. Well, like the ships were somewhat burnt on my behalf by
Mhm.
not really having a big demand for someone with my skill set early on and the entrepreneurial experience. And so it's easy for me to say 13 years later that I have gratitude for the fact that I didn't have an option. But at the time, it wasn't necessarily a blessing. But thankfully now we've worked our way through and have grown a great heating and cooling business, which was the sort of a launch pad to get into the co-working space.
Yes, yes. So I definitely want to jump into that. And I love that story. I have some similarities as well coming out of school in 2011, 2012, and also with the type of skill set that I had, not a huge demand for it. So I was like, okay, how do I navigate this?
Mm-hmm.
And working for myself was definitely the option at the time, only option, but it helped to open up those doors. So love to hear those similarities there. But yes, Refinery 46, the co-working space. So as I understand it, and you can, correct this definitely, as I understand it, it's a co-working space, but with a special sort of focus on people that are in the manufacturing um labor type
Trades,
of
yeah.
arena. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so we sort of took our experience, and this was about 8 years into HomeSense, the heating and cooling company,
Mhm.
and sort of merged our backgrounds and our desire to sort of invest in an asset. We, as my business partner Jesse Cross and I, um, and so we wanted to be in the Broad Ripple area. That's where most of our spaces had been. So we moved 5 times in our first 7 years.
This is home
Just
since
this is
your
HomeSense.
base. Okay.
Yeah, and so because we wanted to have a space that was sort of right sized for our business,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of times as a small business, uh, while you might be ambitious, you don't want to necessarily sign a lease for 5 years for space that's 4x what you need at a certain time. And there was just not a lot of great ways to sort of have a space that scaled with us that kept our overhead costs low at the time. So our own experience was the biggest sort of informative input to what we wanted to build. Um, but then we had started to see sort of the early phases of co-working as a concept take shape locally. So Launch Fishers, Speakeasy were sort of the first two in the marketplace, and obviously a lot more geared toward the tech space. So
Mhm.
early on, it was like, well, we've lived through the challenges of trying to scale a business in space. We've kind of done the meeting with people at Starbucks all across the city. We had our PO box to start out with. We joined networking groups. And so the idea was like, all right, let's take this concept of like the speakeasy over here, apply it to the businesses that we know, that I would say a little less sexy, but the plumbers, the HVAC, the electrical companies in the city. And let's create a cool sort of atmosphere so they don't have to go to Starbucks, and sort of build that networking sort of embedded within the space. And so it wasn't necessarily a new concept. It was just a new spin on that concept that we started to see working. And I would say the idea sort of evolved over the 4 years that we've had Refinery open, to I would say expand a little bit more breadth. And I would say our focus is locally, rather than just sort of trade focused. It's more local businesses and local entrepreneurship. And I emphasize and underscore local, because I think that's sort of the mentality of our space, is people that want to make an investment in community, not just their business, but sort of the intersection and sort of the snowball effect of by being a great entrepreneur, you're also investing in the community. And there's sort of an ethos to that we try to bake into our space.
Yeah, which I'm sure has so many lasting impacts when you look at not only the ways that the business is able to realize their own success, but how people are able to connect with them because of that being baked in from the beginning. I want to have you speak a little bit more about the significance of that local support and that sort of that spirit being baked in from the beginning.
Well, I'll go wide to then go narrow. I think, what do I want to say? There's sort of been a homogenization of business for probably the most of the early part of our lifetime. And I would say your generation, I'm a little bit older than you, I think is especially moving away from that. I'm not anti-franchises. I'm not anti-corporate. I'm really just pro-local. And I think the positive manifestation of that is that local, and it almost by definition is going to be more designed to support the unique needs of a community, whereas a sort of more homogenized franchise is by definition much more sort of unilateral across the board. It's one of the benefits of Starbucks is exactly how your latte is going to look and taste, but what you don't get a lot of times is the unique flavor of that entrepreneur. So down the street from us, we have a place called Gold Leaf, and like you get to know the husband and wife when you walk in there, and like there's they may not have the system set up that a Starbucks does, but what they're doing and the impact they had on the area to create a third place is much more dramatic than just sort of setting up shop with new Starbucks. So again, I'm careful to say I'm not anti-corporate, because I think larger corporations employ a boatload of people, but entrepreneurs are what sort of build almost all net new jobs. So that's been sort of my macro thesis and sort of drumbeat that I put out there all the time, is that we need more entrepreneurs because we need more net new jobs. While unemployment numbers look good right now, there's still sort of pretty dramatic underemployment and pretty dramatic like bad numbers on workforce participation. We need more good work for people, and that's going to come from entrepreneurship. And it's best when it comes from local entrepreneurship, because local entrepreneurs are much more resilient than I think corporate entrepreneurship. So that's sort of my more missional piece to it. We're a small part of that. And so what we try to do, sort of baking into our system, is just, create systems of support for entrepreneurs that are really wrapped around what their unique needs might be. And so there's nothing sort of profound in that, but what we see is that kind of the E-Myth entrepreneur, the guy who was a great plumber, or even the gal who's a great accountant, she might be great in her trade. She might not know how to market her business. She might not know the right person to talk to get the right insurance on her business. So we try to form through relationship and connections, sort of efficient ways to get questions answered, and just sort of the supportive ways where, unfortunately, in the marketplace, entrepreneurs have to sort of quote unquote fake it till they make it. Faking it doesn't always yield the most sort of supportive environments. Imagine faking it as just sort of you're putting a shell on the outside. You're not really letting people in. And so I'd say that is also part of our ecosystem, is like building relationship that helps create trust, that through that trust, people will let their guard down and actually share where their needs are so that we can be supportive.
Yes, absolutely. And that collaboration, it just carries on in so many different ways, and it helps to promote more, collaboration. It just
Yeah,
really, expands upon itself. So love to hear that. Love to hear that.
absolutely.
What role does civic engagement play in your work?
Yeah, I kind of have a weird day to day, and that like my operational role is sort of going down. And so I get to sort of play around with things that I think sort of intersect with the work that we're doing. So when I think of civic engagement, I think of sort of community development, redevelopment, and sort of day to day right now. That's a lot of work related to the 46th Street Keystone Monon area where Refinery 46 is located. Just a big believer again, sort of connected to that earlier point about ground up redevelopment. So rather than just waiting on the government to come in and sort of bestow a vision for our community, I think it's sort of incumbent upon the community to collaborate with one another to do our own reformative efforts to sort of foster community. So that's why I mentioned Gold Leaf, one of the entrepreneurial spaces, restaurant spaces in our area. But we had the Patachu Foundation move to 46th Street. We have a group of folks that work at Arsenal Park to help cultivate that park there. And we're seeing neighbors and businesses, churches, mosques, all sort of collaborate together to participate in revisioning this area of the city. And so while sort of participating in that and trying to be a catalyst, I'm careful to not, come across as sort of dictatorial in any ways, but we've tried to create sort of an open platform in leveraging Refinery 46 as a space to bring the community together. But more broadly, it's just trying to foster conversations that can help build bridges. It's sort of obvious to point out that I think everyone feels a little bit of the sort of broader cultural trends that can sort of bring a feeling of disconnect within the community, whether that's sort of political, racial, et cetera. Like there's just too much out there that's sort of voices of division. And so I would say if I try to focus an effort, it's just around the general idea that trying to be a bridge to help connect people that have far more in common, living in the same community than differences, and try to crowd out the, I think, largely wrong voices that are trying to foster discord.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So as we wrap up, this is probably one of my favorite questions to ask people, and that is about the leadership lessons that have helped to inspire the way that you move and operate as a leader in your own right. So if you were to think of what one or two of those might be that you've accumulated along your journey, what would those be?
Yeah. I was thinking about this because you prompted me earlier, and it's like, honestly, I think the most inspiring leaders are oftentimes the sort of most unsung, because I think I think about like the stories that really like prompt sort of an emotional response from me. A lot of times it's the sacrificial leader that nobody ever heard about, and he or she just did his or her job. And a lot of times it comes down to like serving a community that they feel missionally led to serve, regardless of the fanfare that comes along with it. So that's sort of the archetype. And I mentioned earlier that my dad's a pastor. So here on sort of Holy Week, like the lesson from Christ's sacrifice is the greatest lesson that I take of sort of what leadership looks like, that he would lay down his life for his friends. And so I see obviously sort of lesser versions of that throughout history, but sort of from that basic archetype of personal sacrifice for a mission that's greater than self. So I didn't have any sort of specific ones that came to mind, but I would say that's the archetype.
Yeah, well, it is quite timely, as you mentioned, for the week that we're in, for those that observe, or even those that are just aware and watch others observe this time of year. So, Brian, thank you so much for your time. What are some of the things coming up that people can look forward to coming out of Refinery 46 or other efforts that you are involved in?
Yeah, so we have a neighborhood cleanup in our area coming up in a couple of Saturdays. So we've been pushing out information on that. We're actually expanding our offices. So we've been fully subscribed for probably 3 or 4 months now. And so we're at the early phases of building out another 10 or so offices, exploring what it looks like to potentially do more refineries. That's very TBD, but I've been in the process of doing my research to figure out what that could possibly look like. So yeah, we, like everybody, are sort of try to be vocal on all the social media. So if folks are interested in our story and want to participate and sort of hear what we're up to, we're on all of the things, and we try to keep it pretty well updated. So and just awesome. Want to invite anybody who wants to chat more about anything that we've been talking about, feel free to message me.
Awesome. And the website is there at the bottom, refinery46.com, so people can find out more information. But again, thank you so much, Brian, for your time and for this great conversation. And I hope to hear more from you soon.
Thank you, Ebony. Take care.
You too. All right. And thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in to this episode of The Convo. You can find out more at leadershipindianapolis.com. We have some great programs coming up. We have OI Insights inside Indiana Avenue that is happening on April 26th. You can find out more information. We have just a few seats left in that program. You can find out more information by going to our website and clicking on upcoming events. Also, Get On Board is back in person this year, so you can find out more information about that on our website as well, and more will be coming on our social media platforms. As always, have a great afternoon, everyone, and take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.